I'm 58 years old, and for the past 2 decades, I've been lying to everyone I know about what lives in the abandoned mine shaft behind my property in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. His name is Solomon. He's 8 feet tall. He weighs somewhere around 700 pounds. And until 3 months ago, I thought I was protecting him from the world. I was wrong. He was protecting me. This is the story I swore I'd never tell. The story of how I found something impossible, kept it hidden for 20 years, and finally learned the truth about why it came to me in the first place. And that truth, it's the reason I can't sleep anymore. Let me take you back to October 2003. I was 38 years old, working as a wildlife enforcement officer for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. 12 years on the job, I'd seen poachers, illegal trappers, animal attacks, and every kind of wilderness emergency you can imagine. I thought I understood these mountains. I understood nothing. My name is Thomas Everett Crane. People call me Tom. I grew up in Missoula, spent my 20s in the Army, did 2 tours overseas, then came home and dedicated my life to protecting Montana's wilderness. By 2003, I owned a small cabin on 80 acres backing up to national forest land. Remote, quiet. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles down a dirt road that became impassable every winter. It was exactly the kind of isolation I needed after what I'd seen overseas. On October 14th, 2003, I was doing a routine patrol in the backcountry when I found the first sign. A footprint, not a bear, not an elk, not anything in my training manuals. It was 19 inches long and 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 distinct toe impressions, a stride length that suggested something walking upright, something massive, something that shouldn't exist. I photographed it, measured it, told myself it was a hoax, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next 2 weeks, I found more. Tracks leading deeper into the wilderness, away from any trail, any road, any place humans typically went. I followed them on my days off, telling no one, feeling increasingly like I was losing my mind. On October 29th, I found the blood, a massive smear of it on a granite outcropping, brown and dried but clearly recent, and beside it, another print. This one pressed deep into soft earth, the creature's full weight bearing down. It was injured. Whatever made these tracks was hurt and moving slowly. I should have reported it, should have called in a team, documented everything properly, followed protocol. Instead, I followed the blood trail alone. It led me to the old Henderson mine. The mine had been abandoned since the 1940s, a failed copper operation that left behind a network of tunnels carved into the mountainside. I'd explored it once as a teenager on a dare. The main shaft went back maybe 300 feet before collapsing into rubble. The blood trail led directly inside. I had my service weapon, a flashlight, a radio that probably wouldn't work this deep in the mountains, and absolutely no business going into that mine alone. I went anyway. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not death, something else. Musky, organic, overwhelming, like walking into a den where something large had been living for a very long time. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating old mining equipment, collapsed timber supports, decades of accumulated debris, and then it illuminated him. He was pressed against the far wall of the main chamber, maybe 200 feet in. Sitting with his back to the rock, one massive hand pressed against his side. Even sitting, he was enormous, shoulders wider than any human, arms that hung past his knees, covered entirely in dark reddish-brown hair matted with blood. His eyes reflected my flashlight like an animal's, but the expression in them was anything but animal. It was fear, recognition, and something that looked almost like hope. I raised my weapon instinctively. My hands were shaking. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to run, to radio for backup, to get the hell out of that mine. But he didn't move, didn't charge, didn't make any threatening gesture. He just looked at me, and then, slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand away from his side to show me the wound. Something had torn into him, 4 parallel gashes running from his ribs to his hip, deep enough that I could see tissue and possibly bone in the beam of my flashlight. The wounds were infected, oozing, clearly days old. He wasn't showing me the injury to threaten me. He was showing me because he needed help. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe longer. Everything I thought I knew about the world was collapsing in real time. Bigfoot was a joke, a campfire story, something drunk hunters claimed to see after too many beers. Bigfoot wasn't real. Except he was sitting right in front of me, bleeding to death in an abandoned mine shaft, looking at me with eyes that held more intelligence than half the people I'd met in my life. I lowered my weapon. "I don't know if you can understand me," I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "But if you let me help you, I'll try. And if you try to kill me, I'll empty this magazine into your chest before you can blink. Understood?" He made a sound, low, rumbling, somewhere between a growl and a moan. Then he nodded, a clear, unmistakable nod. I nearly dropped my flashlight. I won't bore you with every detail of those first weeks. The logistics of secretly treating a 700-pound creature for wounds that would have killed any human. The trips to veterinary supply stores in 3 different towns so no one would notice how much antiseptic and antibiotics I was buying. The nights spent in that mine, cleaning his wounds by lantern light, not knowing if he'd finally decide I was a threat and tear me apart. But he never did. He was patient. Cooperative. He'd wince when I cleaned the gashes but never lashed out. He'd watch me work with those intelligent eyes, and sometimes he'd make soft sounds that I gradually learned were expressions of gratitude. By November, the infection was under control. By December, the wounds were closing. By January 2004, he was mobile again. And by then, I'd made a decision that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I couldn't let him go back into the wilderness. Those wounds weren't from a fall or a fight with a bear. Something had attacked him. Something with claws that left 4-inch deep parallel gashes, and whatever it was, it might still be out there. More importantly, I couldn't let anyone find him. If the world discovered what I'd found, they'd hunt him, capture him, lock him in some government facility and study him until he died. I'd seen how the world treated things it didn't understand. I'd seen what happened when something rare and vulnerable fell into the wrong hands. I wouldn't let that happen to him, so I did something that probably makes me a criminal in a dozen different ways. I quit my job, cashed out my pension, used every dollar I had to buy the land surrounding the Henderson mine, including the mineral rights that gave me legal ownership of the mine itself. And I gave him a home. I named him Solomon because of his eyes. There was a wisdom in them that I couldn't explain, a depth of understanding that went beyond anything I associated with animals. He watched, he listened, he learned. Within 6 months, we developed a basic communication system. Not language exactly, but gestures, sounds, patterns that let us understand each other. He could nod or shake his head, he could point. He had different vocalizations for different needs: hunger, pain, contentment, warning. That last one became important because Solomon was always vigilant, always watching the tree line, always listening to sounds I couldn't hear. At first, I thought he was watching for humans, afraid of being discovered. But over time, I realized his attention was always directed in the same direction, deeper into the mountains, up toward the high peaks where even I didn't go. He wasn't watching for humans, he was watching for something else. The years passed. I built a life around protecting Solomon. The mine became his permanent shelter. I reinforced the entrance, installed ventilation, created a system of alarms that would warn me if anyone approached. I brought him food, deer meat, fish, berries, whatever he seemed to want, and he accepted it with a gratitude that never faded. I told people I was a hermit, a retired ranger who wanted to be left alone. My isolation made sense given my history. 2 tours overseas, a divorce that never happened because I never married, no family to speak of. Just a quiet man in the mountains who didn't want company. The lie held. Sometimes hikers would wander close to my property and I'd intercept them, redirect them to other trails, make sure they never found the mine. Once, in 2008, a group of Bigfoot hunters, amateur researchers with thermal cameras and audio equipment, camped within a mile of my land. I spent 4 sleepless nights making sure Solomon stayed hidden, monitoring their movements, ready to intervene if they got too close. They found nothing. Eventually, they left. But the close calls kept me paranoid. Every year brought new technology, trail cameras, drones, satellite imagery. Keeping Solomon's secret became harder and harder. I was exhausted, aging, starting to wonder what would happen when I was gone. And still, Solomon watched the mountains. In 2011, something changed. It was August, hot, dry fire season. I was bringing Solomon his evening meal when I noticed him behaving strangely. He was pressed against the back wall of the mine, as far from the entrance as he could get. His eyes were wide, his breathing was rapid, and he was making a sound I'd never heard before, a low, keening whine, like fear and grief combined. "Solomon, what's wrong?" He looked at me, then he pointed toward the entrance, toward the mountains. I walked to the mine opening and looked out at the darkening forest. I didn't see anything unusual, didn't hear anything except the normal sounds of evening, birds settling, insects chirping, the distant rush of the creek. But Solomon wouldn't calm down. He stayed pressed against that wall all night. I stayed with him, weapon in hand, watching the entrance, waiting for whatever had terrified him. Nothing came. But when I explored the area the next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tracks. Not Solomon's tracks. These were different. Similar shape, but larger, much larger. And the stride length suggested something moving fast with purpose. Something had come close to the mine during the night. Something that walked on two legs like Solomon, but stood at least 2 feet taller. And then it had turned around and headed back up the mountain. After that night, Solomon started communicating more urgently. He'd point at himself, then at the entrance, then make a slashing motion across his side, where his old scars still showed. He was telling me about the attack. He'd point up the mountain, shake his head violently, make sounds of distress. He was telling me something was up there. He'd point at me, then at himself, then make a gesture I'd come to understand as "stay." His palm pressed forward. He was telling me we needed to stay hidden. I tried to understand, tried to ask questions with our limited communication. Was there another one like him? Nod. Was it dangerous? Emphatic nod. Was it the one that hurt him? Nod with that keening whine. Was it still looking for him? Solomon looked at me for a long moment. Then he pointed at the mine entrance, at the mountains beyond, and made a gesture I'd never seen before. He drew his finger in a circle around us. Then he shook his head. It took me a moment to understand. The danger wasn't just looking for Solomon. It was looking for whatever this place was, whatever sanctuary we'd created. And eventually, it would find us. The next years were tense. I saw signs occasionally, tracks too large to be Solomon's, trees marked with scrapes too high for any known animal, sounds at night that made Solomon retreat into the deepest part of the mine and refuse to come out until dawn. But whatever was up there never came close again. Maybe it had moved on. Maybe it was waiting. I didn't know. Solomon aged. I aged. We fell into routines of survival and secrecy, two creatures hiding from a world that didn't know either of us existed. I started keeping records. Journals documenting everything I'd learned about Solomon, his behavior, his intelligence, his fears. If something happened to me, I wanted there to be a record, some proof that he existed, that he mattered, that he was more than a monster in a campfire story. In 2019, I turned 54 and my health started to decline. Nothing serious, but I couldn't ignore the reality anymore. I was getting old. Solomon depended on me completely. If I died suddenly, he'd starve in that mine or be discovered by whoever found my body. I needed a plan. I needed to tell someone. But who? Who could I trust with this secret? Who would believe me? Who wouldn't immediately call the authorities or sell the story to the highest bidder? I thought about it for months, considered reaching out to cryptozoology researchers, but they were either crackpots or attention seekers. Considered family, but I had none close enough to trust. Considered old army buddies, but they'd think I'd lost my mind. In the end, I decided to write it all down first. Everything, every detail, every year. If I could make people understand who Solomon really was, not a creature, but a person, maybe they'd help protect him when I was gone. I started writing in January 2020. By March, the pandemic had locked down the world, and I found myself grateful for the isolation. No visitors, no hikers, no risk of discovery. Just me and Solomon, hiding together from a world gone mad. In July 2023, Solomon got sick. Not injured this time. Sick in a way I couldn't treat with veterinary antibiotics and wound care. He was lethargic, not eating. His breathing was labored. I watched him decline over 3 weeks, helpless to do anything. I couldn't take him to a vet, couldn't bring in a doctor, couldn't do anything except sit with him in that mine and hope he'd recover. On August 3rd, 2023, I thought he was dying. He was lying on his side, barely breathing, eyes closed. I sat beside him with my hand on his shoulder, telling him it was okay to let go, that he'd lived a good life, that I was grateful for every year we'd had together. And then he opened his eyes. He looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen before. Then, slowly, painfully, he reached out and touched my chest, right over my heart. He made a sound, soft, urgent. Then he pointed at the entrance to the mine, then he pointed at the mountains, then he made that circling gesture again, drawing an invisible boundary around us. I didn't understand. He tried again, touched his chest, touched my chest, made a sound I'd never heard before, something that almost sounded like a word. Protect. My heart stopped. Did he just protect? He said it again. Rough, broken, barely recognizable as human speech, but unmistakable. And then he pointed at me and shook his head. I didn't understand. I was protecting him. That was our arrangement. That was what I'd done for 20 years. But Solomon shook his head again and pointed at himself, then at me, then at the mountains. And finally, I understood what he was trying to tell me. Solomon recovered slowly over the next month. The sickness passed, though it left him weaker than before. But as he recovered, he became more insistent in his attempts to communicate. He showed me his scars, not the ones I'd treated 20 years ago, others, older ones. Marks on his back and shoulders that I'd noticed before but never asked about. He traced them with his finger, then pointed up the mountain, then he touched the scars on his side, the ones from 2003. Then he held up his hands, 10 fingers extended, 10 years. He'd been attacked twice, 10 years apart, by the same thing. He touched his chest, then made a walking motion with his fingers. He'd been running. He pointed at the mine, at me, made that stay gesture. He'd stopped running here, but not because he felt safe. He pressed his hand to his chest again, then reached out and pressed it to mine. Because of me. I stared at him, something cold settling in my stomach. Solomon, why did you come here? Why me? He looked at me for a long moment, then he did something that shattered everything I thought I knew. He stood up, slowly, painfully, but fully upright. He walked to the mine entrance, and he made a sound that echoed off the stone walls, a low, resonant call that I felt in my chest as much as heard with my ears. From somewhere up the mountain, barely audible, something answered. Solomon turned back to me, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear or hope or gratitude. It was determination. Over the following weeks, Solomon taught me things I'm still struggling to understand. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. There were others like him, not many, but some, scattered through the deepest wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest. They communicated over vast distances through calls that humans couldn't fully hear. They moved through territories larger than most states, staying hidden from humanity while staying connected to each other. But they weren't the only things in these mountains. Solomon showed me, through gestures and sounds and that single broken word he'd somehow learned to speak, that there was something else, something older, something that hunted his kind through the deep wilderness, that had been hunting them for longer than any of them could remember. He called it something I couldn't pronounce, a series of sounds that translated roughly to the one that takes. It was bigger than Solomon, stronger, and unlike his kind, which avoided humans out of fear, this thing avoided humans for a different reason. Because it was patient, because it was hunting something specific, Solomon's people. The marks on his body weren't random attacks, they were failed attempts to capture him. The thing didn't just kill, it took, and Solomon had escaped it twice, which meant it was still looking for him, still tracking him, still patient. But here's the part that changed everything. Here's the secret I learned after 20 years of thinking I was his protector. Solomon didn't come to my property by accident. He didn't stumble into that mine shaft randomly. He came because of me. His people had watched humans for centuries, watched from the shadows, learning about us, studying us the way we study animals. They knew things about individual humans, who was dangerous, who was trustworthy, who might help if approached. They knew about me, a wildlife officer who worked alone, a man who lived in isolation, someone who had protected vulnerable creatures his whole life. Someone who had lost his faith in humanity overseas, but never lost his capacity for compassion. When Solomon was injured in 2003, fleeing from the thing that hunted him, he didn't just look for shelter. He looked for me, because his people believed I could help him, because they believed I could help all of them. Solomon showed me a mark on the inside of his forearm, something I'd noticed before but never understood, a pattern of scars, old and healed, that formed a deliberate shape, a symbol. He touched it, then touched my chest. Then he pointed at the mountains and made that calling sound again. The answer came back. Closer this time. Others were coming. And they were bringing knowledge, things they'd learned over generations, things about the creature that hunted them, things that might help them survive. They were bringing this knowledge to me because somehow they decided that a human needed to understand, that the only way to protect themselves was to stop hiding completely and trust someone on the outside. They'd chosen me 20 years ago when they sent Solomon in my direction, and now they were coming to tell me why. On September 15th, 2023, 3 more of Solomon's kind arrived at my property. I won't describe what that was like. The fear, the awe, the overwhelming sensation of everything I'd believed about the world shattering and reforming into something stranger and more terrifying than I'd imagined. They were all different sizes, different coloring, different demeanors. One was female, smaller than Solomon, but with the same intelligent eyes. 2 were males, one older with gray streaking through his hair, one younger with fresh scars on his arms, fresh scars. The young one had encountered the thing recently. Within the past month, it was moving, hunting, getting closer. Through a combination of gestures, sounds, and Solomon's broken speech, they told me what they wanted. They wanted documentation. They wanted someone to know they existed, not the world, not yet, but someone who could tell their story if necessary. Because they were dying, not from human hunters or habitat loss, from that thing, the one that takes. It had killed dozens of them over generations, picked them off one by one, patient and relentless, reducing their population from hundreds to barely a handful. They didn't know what it was, didn't know where it came from, didn't know how to stop it, but they knew it was still out there, and they knew it was getting bolder. The older male showed me his back, 4 parallel scars, deep, old, healed badly. The same pattern as Solomon's wounds. The same creature had attacked both of them, decades apart. How old was this thing? How long had it been hunting? The older male made a sound, touched his scars, then pointed at me. He wanted me to see something else. He turned and showed me his shoulder. Another mark, not a scar from attack, a deliberate mark like Solomon's, a symbol. But this one was different, more complex. He touched it, then pointed up the mountain, then made a gesture I didn't understand. A kind of reaching motion, like grasping at something that wasn't there. Solomon translated as best he could. "Gone," he said in that broken voice, "all gone." The symbol marked where the older male had come from, a group, a family, all gone now. Taken, one by one over the course of his long life. He was the last of his family. Solomon was the last of his. The female and the young male were orphans, survivors of groups that no longer existed. This wasn't a population in decline. This was a population being systematically eliminated. And I was looking at nearly everyone who was left. They stayed for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of intensive communication, of learning, of documenting everything they could share. I filled journal after journal with drawings, symbols, maps of territories they showed me, histories they conveyed through gestures and sounds, and they told me about the thing. It was intelligent as them, maybe more. It didn't hunt like an animal. It hunted with strategy, patience, purpose. It would track a single individual for years before striking. It would study their patterns, learn their shelters, wait for the moment of maximum vulnerability. and when it took someone, they never came back. No bodies, no remains, just absence. The young male made a gesture I didn't understand at first, a kind of pulling motion toward his face, toward his head. Solomon translated. "Knows," he said, "takes, knows." It didn't just kill them. It took something from them, some kind of knowledge, some kind of essence. I didn't understand, couldn't understand. But the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't just predation. It was something worse. On October 4th, 2023, they left. The female, the older male, and the young one headed back into the deep wilderness, carrying the knowledge that someone finally knew they existed, that someone would tell their story if they all disappeared. Solomon stayed with me. He was too old to run anymore, too tired, and he'd spent 20 years in this mine. It was his home now, as much as any place could be. But before the others left, the older male did something unexpected. He stood in front of me, looked me in the eyes, and placed his massive hand on my shoulder. Then he made a sound, a single low note that resonated in my chest. Solomon translated, "Brother." The older male saw me as family now, as one of them. Because I'd protected Solomon, because I'd agreed to carry their story, because I was the first human in generations who'd tried to understand. It's been 3 months since that meeting. I'm 58 years old. Solomon is still alive, though weaker than ever. We sit together in the mine shaft most evenings, watching the sun set through the trees, listening to sounds that might be normal forest activity or might be something else entirely. I haven't heard from the others since they left. The calls Solomon makes go unanswered. The mountain is silent. I don't know if they're still alive. I don't know if the thing has found them, but I know it's still out there. Solomon watches the tree line every night, and some nights I see the fear return to his eyes. Some nights we hear sounds that shouldn't exist, too large, too close, too deliberate. Some nights I find tracks in the morning that neither of us made. Here's what I understand now. For 20 years, I thought I was protecting Solomon from the human world, from scientists and hunters and government agents who would take him away and destroy everything he was. But Solomon was never hiding from humans. He was hiding from the thing that hunted his kind, and he came to me because his people believed that a human might be their only hope. Not to fight the thing, I don't even know if it can be fought, but to remember, to tell the world they existed, to make sure that if they all disappear, someone knows what happened to them. That's the terrifying secret Solomon carried for 20 years. Not that Bigfoot is real, though that's terrifying enough. The secret is that something else is real too, something that's been hunting them through the dark forests of this continent for longer than humans have kept written records. Something patient and intelligent and relentless, something that might be coming for the last of them right now. I'm writing this in December 2023. Solomon is asleep in the mine behind me. His breathing is labored these days. I don't know how much time he has left, but I made a promise to him and his people. If they disappear, all of them, someone needs to know they existed. Someone needs to know what killed them. Someone needs to know what's still out there in those mountains. I'm not asking you to believe me. I know how this sounds. I know what people think about Bigfoot stories. But I've spent 20 years with one of them. I've looked into his eyes and seen intelligence, emotion, fear, and love. I've met his people, scared, scattered survivors of something I still don't fully understand. And I've seen the scars. Whatever made those scars is real. It's intelligent. It's hunting. And the handful of Solomon's people still alive may not be able to hide from it much longer. Last week, I found tracks near the property line. Big ones, bigger than Solomon's. They circled the entire perimeter, methodical, patient, like something was studying the boundaries, learning the layout, waiting. I showed Solomon. He looked at the tracks for a long time. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw him make a gesture I'd never seen. He pressed both hands together over his chest, closed his eyes, lowered his head, something like prayer, something like goodbye. I don't know how this ends. Maybe the thing will finally find Solomon after all these years. Maybe it will find me too. Maybe I'll wake up tomorrow and he'll be gone. No struggle, no sound, just absence like all the others who were taken. But tonight, he's still here. We're sitting at the entrance to the mine, watching the stars, listening to the silence of the mountains. And I'm grateful for every moment we have left. 20 years ago, I thought I saved a creature's life in an abandoned mine shaft I didn't understand. He came to me, chose me, made me part of something I never knew existed. He made me family. And whatever happens next, whatever's coming down from those mountains, I won't abandon him. Some promises you keep no matter what, some secrets you carry until the end. And some brothers, no matter how different, are worth protecting with everything you have, even when you finally learn what's hunting you both. Final entry, Thomas Everett Crane, December 2023. The tracks are back tonight, closer than before. Solomon won't come to the entrance anymore. If anyone finds these journals, know that they existed. Know that they were intelligent, compassionate, and afraid. Know that something took them, and for God's sake, stay out of the deep wilderness. Because whatever's out there, it's still hungry.